I like to be honest in my videos. I also like to be honest about what my motivations are for making a video. This video I'm making now, kind of two big reasons why I'm making it. People used to ask me about this all the time, for one thing. People used to ask me to make a video on this topic. But, especially women in my life, women who are starting sexual relationships with me, romantic relationships with me, very often one of their first questions for me is basically, why are you not left-wing? Or they struggle to understand where I am on the political spectrum, even though they've read my essays, even though sometimes they've read a lot of research I've done, a lot of intellectual work I've done in writing, and sometimes they've watched 100 of my YouTube videos. So even though they have a sense of my character and my interests and my political views on particular issues, very, very often the women in my life are the women just coming into my life, women getting to know me and getting, thinking about whether or not they're going to commit to me romantically. Very often what they want to know is, why are you not left-wing? Second big reason is, for a long time now, I've been thinking about doing a video talking about the poisonous, dangerous, counterproductive, ignorant, and self-righteous attitudes that I see many left-wingers exhibiting here on YouTube. Left-wing people within veganism, vegans who describe themselves as anti-capitalist, and so on. But if I make a video that approaches that in a sort of schematic way, if I make a video that approaches those issues from the top down, like talking about the principles of economics, history of economic theory, that message is never going to reach the audience that needs to hear it. It's very easy for me to make a video criticizing anti-capitalists or criticizing communists that will be received positively by other people who already understand what's wrong with anti-capitalists and communists. There's the audience that wants to hear it, and there's the audience that needs to hear it. And those are two very different audiences. So it occurred to me I could just make a video talking about my life subjectively and my reasons for why I am not left-wing. I grew up in a context in Toronto, Canada, where absolutely everyone around me was left-wing. The political spectrum of the people surrounding me, where I grew up in Toronto, Canada, went from moderate socialist to extreme communist. It went from the left of center out to the extreme left. I never met anyone close to the center growing up. I never met any conservatives. I remember one conversation on a bus with a guy who was conservative, but it's amazing. And at a few other points in my life, I've been in that kind of situation. When me and my wife, I'm divorced now, but me and my wife, later my ex-wife, I remember when we were together in Cambridge, England, it just blew my mind. I had been living in two different communist countries. I've lived in Laos, I've lived in China, two different genuinely communist countries. And then I'm living in England, and I'm surrounded by communists. I'm surrounded by communists who are way more extreme and way more jejune and way more naive than anyone you meet in China who's a member of the Communist Party. In China, you can meet very down-to-earth, very cynical communists who have real-world experience, and then you go back to a place like England or a place like Toronto, and you meet these fanatical left-wingers, It's such a strange contrast for me to live. I've lived in Cambodia. Cambodia is a former communist country, home to one of the greatest disasters in the history of communism. I grew up utterly lacking the contrast between right-wing and left-wing, or even between moderate conservative and moderate left-wing. And it's always kind of burdened me. Just now, in the last couple of years, when I was at University of Victoria, I thought it was hilarious that some of my professors regarded me as conservative. I mean, look at my YouTube channel. There is nothing conservative about any of my values. I'm a former scholar of Buddhism, chose to live my life in Asia, chose to live my life pursuing a combination of humanitarian work and research interests, trying to make the world a better place in terms of ecology, but also in terms of human rights, in terms of so many issues I was engaged with in Southeast Asia, in terms of, human trafficking and poverty and the progress of medicine in these third world countries, developing countries, the transition from communism to capitalism in countries like Laos and Cambodia, post-war ruination. I've been engaged in so many different ethical issues. And I mean, there's so many ways in which you can tell my values as a person, even my values just as a vegan, cannot be described as conservative. In many ways, you could say I'm a radical because the kind of change I want to see in the world is so fundamental, is such a fundamental status, is such a fundamental challenge to the status quo. And of course, beyond that, I'm a nihilistic atheist. I describe myself as an historical nihilist. I don't believe in religion. I don't believe in conservatism, and I don't believe in liberalism. I don't believe in anything. So in so many ways, it's obvious that I'm not a conservative. And yet I go back to Canada. I'm in this university in Victoria. And again, it's one of those situations where the political context goes from left-wing to communist. Everyone is either a socialist or a communist. They're so far left that they perceive me as conservative. And to some extent, that's going to happen within veganism. People are going to perceive me as conservative just because I'm a pragmatic, down-to-earth person. Look, it's very humbling to approach the world without any ideology, whether that's because you're a nihilist like me or just because you're a pragmatist who can put aside your own feelings, your own commitment to certain ideas. To look at the world pragmatically and ask yourself, how can I make this situation better? Okay? It's very humbling. Saudi Arabia, terrible political situation. What can you do to make it better? Cambodia, terrible political situation. What can you do to make it better? Canada, I cared deeply about. I was really committed to political issues involving our native people, the Cree and the Ojibwe especially. We say First Nations, American Indians, okay? Terrible political situation. What can I do to make it better? If you just start with that question and proceed empirically and humbly to try to figure out what you can do as one man or as one woman to make the world a better place, whether it's in urban Cambodia or rural Canada, you're never going to come to this conclusion that all of the left-wingers start from, that all of the anti-capitalists start from, that the system is evil, the system can never produce absolute human equality, therefore the most constructive thing you can do with your time is to work to destroy the system itself, is to work to destroy capitalism. And that's never going to be true for you as one individual, and it's never going to be true for you and your circle of 5 friends, 10 friends, 50 friends, the small circle of people you can possibly organize to make the world a better place. What I see within the vegan movement is self-styled anti-capitalists, self-styled crypto-communists. Really, that's what they are. People who are communists don't want to admit they're communists. Claiming that the problem with veganism is that veganism works within the system and isn't a fundamental challenge to the existence of the system itself. And when they say the system, they mean capitalism. And then they will add on to this the idea that capitalism is designed to fail, capitalism is inherently oppressive, inherently evil, that it is ineluctably unstable, exploitative, that capitalism relies on economic assumptions such as infinite growth, that mean it's doomed to some terrible catastrophe, etc., etc., etc. This is an attitude that starts by disregarding empirical experience and really gets worse from there. I'm not here to tell you that capitalism is wonderful. I'm really not. I'm here to tell you that if you sit down with yourself with all due humility and all due honesty and think about how you can make the world a better place, it's not through destroying capitalism. Whether that's with all due humility that you want to go to Cambodia and do humanitarian work in Cambodia, or Saudi Arabia, or right now maybe you want to go to Lebanon or the border areas of Turkey and help refugees from Syria. The idea that destroying capitalism is a positive moral cause is a poisonous and dangerous, distorting optic to allow into your life, whether you're left-wing, right-wing, or centrist. And it becomes ultimately a kind of silly, self-fulfilling prophecy in the minds of people who believe in it. All right? If somebody asks you, what's the problem with Cambodia today in 2017? You've got to sit down and do research. You've got to sit down and do analysis. Let's figure out what really are the problems in Cambodia today. And within that category, which problems can we hope to change? It's fundamentally a lazy, fatuous attitude to say, no, these specific problems, the fruit of this specific analysis doesn't matter because the problem is capitalism itself. There's a hell of a lot of lazy thinking like that on the left. I think I've mentioned this before. I went to a conference on ecology in Canada, and this guy stood up and gave a lecture that began by saying, he was a communist, that the problems they were discussing at this particular seminar, really they were a joke, because to talk about changing power consumption and power generation and ecological impacts of power generation, really that doesn't matter, because we all know that the fundamental problem with electricity generation will never be solved until there is a bloody revolution in which the workers rise up and destroy the ruling class. And a bunch of people in the crowd all murmured their agreement with this, because again, downtown Toronto, a lot of people are left-wing. And he said, okay, but with that having been said, now I'm going to say a few words about the problem with how electricity generation is organized in Canada. Oh my God. In a subtle and profound way, this type of revolutionary conceit poisons and vitiates and invalidates everything you do as a researcher, everything you do as a humanitarian worker, everything you can do as a vegan activist. And I know that problem is invisible to the people who are already inside the left-wing mindset or the anti-capitalist mindset. Okay? Why am I personally not a left-winger? I grew up around left-wing people who said they were anti-war. The truth was they weren't anti-war. They were pro-war. They just wanted to fight wars that they could win. They weren't anti-war. They just supported the wars Russia was fighting and opposed the wars America was fighting. It was all a lie. I grew up around left-wing people who talked seriously. This is before 1989, before the fall of the Berlin Wall, who talked seriously about their future, and thus also about my future, fighting in a revolutionary war that would tear the world apart. That was how they saw the future. But when I would ask them pragmatically, what weapons training were they getting? What military training were they getting to prepare for this war, for this revolution that they thought was the future? This is classic Marxist ideology. Marxism absolutely believes that the progress social progress of any kind relies on violence, relies on basically a type of civil war. Okay? Communism is a violent ideology and believes that social progress is exclusively achieved through violence. And this is very influential in the whole left wing. When I ask these people, what military training are you undertaking to actually prepare for that? They would look at me blankly. Okay? I grew up around left-wing people who talked about helping the poor, but they did nothing to help the poor. They had no sincere, pragmatic engagement with helping the poor, whereas the right-wing Christians, the conservative Christians across the street, really were helping the poor. And nobody on the left was. Nobody around me, nobody in the world I lived in. Okay? This is obviously some left-wing people actually do humanitarian work. Okay? It's not that my values were conservative. Okay? I was interested in taking left-wing values out of the realm of ideology, out of the realm of excuse-making, and implementing them in a pragmatic, humble, down-to-earth way in the real world in a way that would actually make a difference. And that is why I am not left-wing. Even though I'm not Christian and I don't believe in Christianity, my thought process is much more like a Christian who's looking at humanitarian work, whether it's helping the poor in Canada or trying to build a more positive future in Cambodia, who's looking at how can I make a positive difference now. And although left-wing people, anti-capitalist people, communist people, although they invoke the name of poverty, although they invoke the idea of helping the poor, they're only invoking that as a pretext and as an excuse for violence. They're only invoking that as an excuse for their ideology of a holy war that will create a utopia. They call it class war. And one of the most fundamental delusions is simply about the meaning of that term and of the refusal of people on the left to face up to the violent and frankly terrifying reality, historically, of what class war really means. Class war is about people going door to door and slaughtering their own neighbors. Class war is about the poor killing the rich. Class war is about putting people on trial, murdering them, and murdering their children in the crib because of their class status. Read the history of Russia, read the history of China, read the reality of what the ideology of class war was anywhere that it was put into action. And the people who come on my channel and make excuses for mass murder under communism, you have to understand that you are making excuses for an ideology and a political movement that's killed millions of people. And that has included genocide, that has included acts of genocide. Not exclusively or primarily, but yes, for example, the de-Cossacization campaign in Russia starting already in 1917. There were genocidal aspects to communism of exterminating ethnic groups. It's part of the history. The short and snappy answer of why I am not left-wing is because I actually want to make the world a better place. I refuse to be part of a political movement that is based on the lie that they already are making the world a better place. I refuse to be part of a political movement that's justifying violence, past, present, or future violence, that is glorifying a violent revolution, past, present, or future, that's glorifying mass murder. I refuse to be part of a political movement that is glorifying violence in the name of making the world a better place. And that's why we see this bizarre contrast between veganism and the conventional left wing. That's why it makes left-wingers so uncomfortable to look at veganism and recognize veganism is a movement that really can deliver on its promises. Veganism is a movement that's based on attainable goals, not an unattainable utopia, not an impossible set of ideals. Veganism can make a real difference in ecology. Veganism can, in a sense, save the planet. Veganism can change all of our lives for the better as individuals. It can be such a fundamental change in our society, and yet what it can't do is justify the class war. What it can't do is serve as an ideological plank in their fantasy, their violent fantasy, that the workers will rise up and destroy the ruling class. Okay? And that's what we have to defend against the left-wing extremists within veganism. And the left-wing extremists may even be the majority right now. As veganism becomes more mainstream, we're going to get more moderates, we're going to get more centrists, we're going to get more reasonable people, we're going to get more pragmatic voices who just want to make a positive difference. But right now, that is a discussion that needs to happen. Veganism is not revolutionary. Veganism is not violent. Veganism does not promise you an absolute equality between the factory worker and the factory owner. It's irrelevant to veganism. Okay? Veganism is not about tearing down the society we already live in. But what veganism is about is making a positive difference in this world without killing anyone.